Welcome to The Spectrum, brought to you by ABA Centers of America. I'm Dr. Ted Bender, clinical psychologist and mental health advocate. To learn more, visit our website at abacenters.com. Today, I have the overwhelming privilege of speaking with the brilliant and talented actor Joe Mantegna about autism awareness. I'm just going to mention a few of the roles, some of my favorites. We wouldn't have enough time to get through them all. Obviously, Godfather 3, one of my favorite characters, Joey Zaza. Criminal Minds, I think close to 300 episodes. Is that about right?
Well, yeah, the show's been on over 325, I think, 325.
And another absolutely amazing show. My kid's favorite character on The Simpsons, Fat Tony, The Bronx Bull, and much, much more. But today, I want to thank you again so much for coming down in person to talk about your advocacy involving autism and autism spectrum disorders.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Again, can you start to tell us a little bit about what got you into even talking about autism and advocating for spectrum disorders?
Well, to tell you the truth, it kind of happened shortly after my daughter was diagnosed with autism.
Your daughter, Mia?
My daughter, Mia. We were in New York at the time. I was actually shooting 2 films at the time. I was shooting a Woody Allen film, Alice, and also shooting Godfather 3, which was being shot in New York as well as Italy and a few other places. So anyway, we were in New York. My daughter was about 2.5 years old at the time. My wife was pregnant with our second child at the time. We started to pick up these little indications that there was something a little different about Mia's development. You know what I mean? We could tell her speech was not really there. Her eye contact, all these, and you have to remember this is 1990, so this is some years ago. So we figured we were here in New York. We weren't at our home here in Los Angeles, but so we contacted some people to get some medical advice as to maybe who we could see. So we finally get some advice as to perhaps someone who to see. And of course, we get the diagnosis that, seems to this particular doctor that she exhibited maybe 8 of the 10 traits of being autism. So of course, we immediately get that. That's that moment when your heart goes into your stomach, then back up again, and for your first impulse is, oh my God, now what? And then but my wife and I have been together a long time, even prior to this. So we look at each other, and then the next instance is, okay, now what are we going to do about it? And so of course I finished the 2 films. My second daughter is born while we're in New York. My daughter Gia. So we all come back now to California. Coming back now with 2 daughters. We left with 1, come back with 2, and one has also been diagnosed now with autism while we were away. So of course, we immediately start jumping into well, now what can we do? We start examining what our options are. While I was in New York, there was a group that contacted me called NAR, National Alliance for Autistic Research. And I contacted them, and they started giving me some information about maybe how they can help, whatever. But to go to your question, shortly, a few months later, as we're starting to do the publicity for Godfather 3, they had, I think it was either People Magazine or Time Magazine. They wanted to do an interview with me as I was playing the head villain, Joey Zaza. So as often is the case with these kind of publications, they did their research, and somehow, though I wasn't public about this at all, somehow they found out or heard that, you may have a daughter has autism.
Was that sprung on you?
It was sprung on me. Actually, it was a phone interview I was doing with the interviewer, and it was a woman, and she said, "It's come to our attention that you have a daughter with autism. Now, would you like to? Can we mention that? Can we talk about that?" And I have to say, it was like it took me aback, because I thought, "Wow, where did that come from, and how did they even know that?"
Right.
But then you have to get past that and kind of basically answer the question.
Yeah.
And it was in that instant I thought to myself, okay, I have 2 options here. I either say, no, I don't want to talk about it. But by doing that, I thought to myself, I'm negating my daughter's existence. I'm basically saying, no, I'm not going to talk about that because it's that's very personal. But I'm thinking, but she's in the world. This is, and there's a lot to talk about, because we've been experiencing what that situation is like, and so I thought, well, maybe there's something to be said about talking about it. If nothing else, I'm at least acknowledging her existence, that she's part of my family, our family, and I can't in good faith say, no, but let's talk about my newborn that's just a few months old. So I said, no, I'll talk about it. So we didn't talk in length about it, but I remember one kind of question that came up. It says, well, when did you first learn about how did it manifest itself? Or, and I basically, one of the answers I gave was, I said, I remember being in a grocery store with her, and she had a tendency at that age. She was only 2.5 years old,
Right.
and she would sometimes be afraid of something or something. She'd hold her ears up for certain stuff, or she'd scream and go, ah. And I said, sometimes the look from the other parents in the grocery store would set me off a little bit, because they'd look at me like I was a bad parent. And I wanted to grab them and shake them and said, no, she has autism, and we just actually found this out, that this is what this is. You know what I mean? And so, anyway, the article comes out. They didn't mention in length about that. They mentioned, and Joe has a daughter with autism, and da, 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 da. Well, I started getting some basically fan letters to send to, like, through my agency, from people who basically said, you got to remember, again, this is 1990.
Right.
So the autism thing was not so prevalent, or certain, there was a lot hadn't happened yet in that field. Letters saying, thank you so much for doing that, for acknowledging that, because, like one woman writes, I thought we were the only kind of people that happens to.
Yeah.
And to know that you have a public voice and are able to tell what that experience is like, and what the kind of things you have to deal with, is really comforting and helpful to all of us. And at that instant, I realized, well, then that's it. The cat's out of the bag, and will stay out of the bag. And that's why I'm here today. I mean, it goes back to the question when someone asks me, well, what's it like to have a child with autism? And my answer always is, I don't know what it's like not to have a child with autism. And so once you've done that, then that's where you're at.
This is literally, the point of this work that I do, and this podcast is exactly what you just mentioned. And you mentioned that was in the early 90s.
Right.
And we're still in a position where we need to bring as much public attention to this as possible for many reasons. For one, that parent in the grocery store that didn't understand, that teacher in the classroom that doesn't know what's going on, raising money for research. And we still, as much as we know about treating the disorder, we still have a lot of questions about how it comes about. We have some knowledge of it. We have some science behind it, but we don't know exactly what causes it. And the only way we're going to get there is by continuing to do this kind of advocacy and bringing awareness to the public about the spectrum and the disorder.
Right.
So going back, you mentioned 2.5 years old. The first thing you kind of remember catching was that sensory experience in the grocery store, loud noises, right? I've spoken to tons of people who have the same kind of experience, adults with autism, any kind of unexpected noise.
Right.
It might not be super loud, but just it's unexpected.
Exactly.
And just kind of set them off. So that was the first thing you noticed. How did it evolve over time, and what other difficulties did you see?
Well, there was that, and again, there was always that thing, and the visual things as well could do that. I mean, I remember once we went to like a Renaissance fair, and all of a sudden there were these people wearing these costumes with face masks and things like that, and all of a sudden you could tell this was freaking her out, because just the visualization of things that were a little unusual were putting her on edge.
She seemed tense.
Oh, very tense, and sometimes and afraid. And
Yeah.
but one thing we did notice, and we even tried some, like we tried one therapy that we'd heard about, where like an audio therapy thing, where she would wear earphones and they would play different, gradually, to try to perhaps acclimate her to certain kind of sounds and things, and let her realize that, that these things exist and they're not to be afraid of.
Right.
I don't know the science behind it, but like I said, we were willing to try this, that, and everything. But we did notice that over the years, again, starting at 2.5 up until she's now, 36 years old, a lot of those things, whether or not, as to what the reasons that they were able to kind of get resolved, I can't put my finger on, but many of them were. Like that sound thing seemed to go away. So in other words, whether or not she became inured to that kind of thing and came to the realization that it's not something needs to set her off. And the same thing with the visual. In fact, the opposite happened with the visualization thing. She's the only one in our family that loves like monster movies and horror movies. She's not afraid of anything. She really has, those things don't freak her out. It's not scary to her. She kind of embraces them. So we can't, but that's,
So she can watch Criminal Minds.
Oh, without question, she can watch anything. It's just, it doesn't really, she has a different perception of what other people might think is weird or gory or shocking or something, which is fine. So there were, but one thing, and it goes back to something you had talked about. You mentioned the thing about the schooling thing. That was a major thing that we had to deal with. Because initially your first impulse is, okay, well, she has this thing, so she's going to have to be in a special class with special kids and
Yeah.
special teachers. And we did that for early on for
Hmm.
quite a while, especially preschool, kindergarten, and the first couple of years. But when the good side of my occupation in terms of the travel is that we always went together,
Oh, really?
because I always felt it's important that we travel as a family,
Hmm.
than rather than, hey, daddy's going to be gone for a couple of months, good
Yeah.
luck,
Yeah.
and have more. My wife then has to deal with the two children, one of them with the special needs. So instead, our feeling was, look, they may miss out on some schooling, like in these early years of first, second, third grade,
Yeah.
whatever it may be, but they'll learn the capital of Indiana some other time.
Yeah.
In the meantime, they'll just be with dad.
Yeah.
But by doing that, we traveled extensively. We'd go to places like Europe, a lot of times in Canada. And in Canada, we learned a lot.
Hmm.
And the reason is, at least at that time, when we looked at kind of like, especially when I was there for extended period, to try to put them in a schooling situation, a lot of times they would say, well, we don't really do special education in the same way you do there.
Hmm.
We're going to put her in a regular class, but if she needs a special kind of thing within that class, we'll provide it. Like
Interesting.
their thing is, like, if the kid has a hearing problem, they give her whatever she needs for the hearing. If she's paralyzed, we'll accommodate the wheelchair. If she has autism, well, we'll accommodate her with, if she needs an aid, whatever. But we're not going to put her in a class with just kids on the spectrum. She's going to be with a regular class, and we'll just accommodate her within that class.
How'd she respond to that?
She responded great,
Yeah.
because they were prepared for it and the teacher was prepared for it. And that's what opened our eyes. We're like, what?
Hmm.
So now, which was basically the early form of inclusion to us.
Mhm.
To us, inclusion didn't really, we didn't see it happening here. It was more like when you went to the public schools or whatever, because she did have an IEP. In other
Mhm.
words, we put her in the public school system because they at least provided the services.
Right.
But we figured, well, that's our alternative. She's going to be in a special class. And maybe someday she'll be able to work her way where she could go in a regular class with
Mhm.
regular kids.
Regular kids.
Exactly, whatever you
Yeah.
word regular, what I mean. But so anyway, when we came back, especially then we went out to Chicago, and I did a movie in Chicago, and we went to we went to a private school rather than a public school, thinking, well, maybe there's something there that they'll accommodate her. And luckily, this one principal of that school said, you have to go meet Miss Fendler, who teaches our first grade class. Because it was applicable to go in first grade at that time. She was
Mhm.
6 years old. We walk into her class and we explain, well, this is Mia. And instantly, this woman, Miss Karen Fendler, said, I've got it. She takes Mia by her hand, walks her in front of the class of all these 6-year-olds and says, kids, this is Mia. She has autism. She's going to do strange things. She may walk up to the blackboard. She may start singing. She may do. We're all going to help her out. We're all going to love her. We're all going to be supportive, right? Yay. And we're like, oh my God, this can't happen. So that started it. And to this day, we're very close to that Karen Fendler, that teacher like I said, Mia's 36. She was 6 years old.
Right.
Anyway, from that point on, we kind of did our due diligence to try to make inclusion work. So in
Yeah.
other words, from that point on, in each year of schooling, sometimes it was difficult, but sometimes it worked out magnificently, because the school would respond and they talk to the teacher, and the teacher said, well, I've never had that in a class before, but if I'm willing to try it. And ultimately, 99% of the time, it was positive for everybody, where the kids benefited from it, Mia
Mhm.
benefited from it. And that's why we never thought we could ever do anything but that.
It brought the whole class into it.
Exactly. And so they were able to understand that not everybody's the same.
Yeah.
That there's going to be people who are a little different, and we have to try to accommodate them.
And it's okay.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
And so she always had an aide there, just to kind of, because you don't want to put that extra burden on the school of like, well, no, this is your responsibility, or if they handle this. So, but yet, it worked. And then by the time she was in high school, she didn't need that aide. I mean, they understood, and she'd be in the regular class, and every once in a while she'd have to go into a regular kind of or not a regular, but like a special needs
Mhm.
kind of a environment in a certain class at a certain year. But for the most part, from those early first, second, third grade on, it was always inclusion. And I think it made a huge, huge difference.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by ABA Centers of America.
Totally agree with you. And at ABA centers, we do some work in the office, and we have incredible play spaces and offices built out to treat this. But a lot of times we're spending in the home, and in the schools, and we're huge advocates for being present in the school system with the child who is struggling, and like you said, being inclusive and as regular kind of classroom style as possible. But like you said, they need some help, especially early on, and that's where we really shine, I think, as a treatment company, by really meeting the child where they're at, literally and figuratively.
Great.
So you mentioned, again, I think for a lot of people who are watching this out there, a lot of parents who may have that 2-year-old or 3-year-old, they're starting to notice symptoms. You mentioned the sensory issues, but how did that progress? What other things did you notice when she was really young that a parent might recognize? Or
Well, there are certain things. I mean, there's things that are still pervasive. I mean, she'll do the
hand
hand
gestures?
flapping and
Hmm.
things like that, and she'll get fixated on certain words or phrases
Hmm.
or things, and it's just part of her DNA. It's just part of what that condition is,
Yeah.
and yet, and then on this flip side, there's certain savant abilities that kind of show themselves.
Tell us about that.
Well, she first of all, she has this incredible thing about dates. We use
Mhm.
Mia like almost like a computer because we could say, Mia, what was the name of that restaurant that we ate at when you were, 11 years old in Chicago? And she'll rattle off the day. She'll say, "Oh, that was that," and it was, what we ate and things like that. I mean, it's almost like she compartmentalizes so many experiences and dates and events and things like that, especially things that are important to her. She can name almost any, musician, rock and roll musician, and she'll tell you exactly their birthday and
Huh.
things like that. Uh, Other things were, and this maybe tie into a visual thing. I remember we brought her to a party once when she was about maybe 5 years old, and it was a little boy's birthday party, and they had just given him a video game,
Mhm.
and he was sitting on the floor with a couple other boys,
Yeah.
and they were working their way through this video game, and I remember I had Mia by the hand, and she's watching them and watching them play the game. And one of the mothers, I think, came by and says, "Well, maybe Mia would like to play," thinking, "Oh, let's help the little
Mhm.
girl out so she could be included." And so the little boy says, "Oh, okay, you want to play it?" And Mia really had very little language though, but kind of understood what was. She sat down and she grabbed the controls, and this was mind blowing for us. She starts working through this thing. And it's like doom, 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 and these kids are looking at us because she's solving it, and it's going bang, 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 and finally it goes do 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 do, brr, brr, game over, and it was like these kids looked at us and they said, "That's not supposed to happen." You buy this game so that supposedly it takes you a couple weeks to get through it, and she did it. And we're like, and I remember we discussed it with again with somebody, so whether it was somebody a professional like yourself, and it came to our attention that it's very possible that she has that capability of when her visualization is so good, and if she sees something and if she sees that it's a mistake, she's not going to repeat that mistake.
Mm.
In other words, she has the capability of saying that doesn't work. I will never do that again.
Interesting.
Where a lot of us don't have that. In other words, we maybe we'll remember it for 5 seconds, but 15 seconds later, we forget, "Oh, we shouldn't have done that because that was a mistake." It's like going through a maze knowing that you never are gonna hit
Mhm.
that wall twice, and she does have that capability. I noticed that we'll play Jeopardy. We watch Jeopardy a lot together, her and I,
Interesting.
and she'll throw that answer out a second before the question comes up on the screen.
Huh.
So it's almost like she has that ability of visualization and comprehending what it says and instantly responding to it. But yet on the other hand, she can't tie her shoes,
Yeah.
and still wants to, go to Disneyland and visit the princesses.
Yeah.
So you learn that it's always going to be the yin and the yang. It's going to be that extreme and then that extreme.
Absolutely.
And
My major professor in graduate school, he once told me that there's a lot of professors in universities that are, all stars in their field. And his theory was that the majority of them were somewhere on the spectrum,
oh,
maybe very high
I
functioning,
I
but
I I'm convinced of it. I mean, whenever I see people like, I mean, I don't want to, you know, insinuate that a lot of these people are, but you talk about even when you look at somebody like whether it's a Bill Gates or Elon
Mhm.
Musk and people of that caliber who are like these brilliant minds,
Yeah.
I see those little kind of they've been the lucky ones that really tapped into all the
Yeah.
99% of the positive aspect of it and maybe 1% of the negative aspect
Right.
of it, which makes them just a little quirky,
Yeah.
which is okay.
Yeah.
But you never know how those odds are gonna,
Yeah,
play
and
themselves out.
that's a good point for our listeners at home. We call it a spectrum disorder because this disorder lies on a line. You may have very, very mild symptoms, like we said, just turns out as a quirk, but they're able to tap into that laser-like focus on whatever their specialty is. It could be a moderate case where they need a tremendous amount of attention and skills building, and then you may have the very severe cases where they're going to need lifetime care. But people are going to be somewhere along the
Right.
spectrum, and the level of severity varies very differently from person to person.
Right, exactly right.
So over the years, and I think it's incredibly valuable to hear this from you, especially for parents of young kids who don't know what's going on. What kind of supports have you found, maybe not just for her, but for you as a family unit to kind of help to deal with this as positively as you have?
Yeah. Well, luckily, being in the line of work I am, I mean, I'm in a very social profession, and
Mhm.
I have a very social lifestyle. And I think in a way that's been very positive because what it is we've never kind of excluded Mia
Mhm.
as part of that. And if anything, she's been totally included, and everybody gets it. So, I mean, the entertainment community is pretty open-minded anyway,
Yeah.
which is great.
Yeah.
Um, but and I think it's been very beneficial in the sense of that too, just as we did with the schooling. It's the same way socially and with everything else. In other words, it's been, I think, very beneficial for Mia that she's been in an environment where, look, we've always felt the world is not going to adapt to her. She's going to have to adapt to the world,
Yeah.
and so the world is what it is, and we're not going to always be here. So we have to prepare her as much as possible for that eventuality, and know that. Thank God she's got a younger sister who's very in tune too. But you can't count on anything. You have to just make her as functionally independent as you can, but yet knowing that they have to function within the real world as much as possible.
Yeah.
And so there's that. So I mean, so I guess what I'm saying is, y- y- uh, as I said, we had that choice, and I've known parents that have done that, have done the opposite. They've been closed mouthed about it.
Yeah.
They've been secretive about it. They have almost like that hidden kid. That nobody talks about and nobody, is aware. If they may be aware of it, but nobody brings it up because it's like, well, we don't know what's going on there, but we just kind of know it exists. That wasn't the scenario we played, or the the road we took. And I'm of the belief, yeah, you there's going to be some hardships because of it, or maybe not so much hardships, but there's going to be some difficulties, and there's going to be moments where you're going to say, "Oh, I wish
Yeah.
that wasn't so." But yet, on the other hand, it's like you say, you got to just get out there and let them experience the world as it is.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple really good points in there too. I've seen in my own personal life and professional life that, the family that doesn't want to acknowledge it, like you said, that hidden kid where they just absolutely refuse to believe there's anything wrong with their child. And while we can certainly understand that from an ego perspective,
Hmm.
it unfortunately does no service to the child because they're not getting the services they need.
Correct.
And, through your lived experience and advocacy, you know full well that the earlier we diagnose this and the earlier treatment begins, the better projection and outcomes for kids as they grow up and navigate the world. Because, like you said, they're going to have to live in this world. The entire world is not going to adapt to them.
Exactly right. And there's no, early on when you first get that diagnosis, you think, oh God, you're hoping that they invent that magic bullet.
Yeah.
That they're going to come up with that pill, that serum, that whatever that's going to fix this. But then especially when they go after they come out of childhood and go into young adulthood and then adulthood,
Hmm.
you start to realize, okay, we still hope that happens
Yeah.
someday. They are able to say, yeah, we can twist the chromosome and we're going to avoid this ever happening to
Hmm.
anybody else. But in the meantime, you've got this planet full of these adults who they were only kids for so many years, but
Yeah.
they're going to be adults for a whole lot longer.
Hmm.
And you have that they have to be acknowledged, and they have to be, we have to be aware of that and do what we can to, make the world at least as open their arms to them as much as they would to anyone else.
I totally agree. And one thing that I see in the field of autism is the need to really to meet them where they're at, again, physically and mentally. And I think it's just so important to have really access to the school systems. Some schools and some teachers, like you mentioned, the one that you're still close with, have that skill and that specialty. Other people, through no fault of their own, just have had no training, and
Right.
they don't know how to handle that situation. I
Right.
think it's just so important for treatment companies, like our treatment company, ABA Centers, but for treatment companies to be able to, have that presence in the school system to help them through their day, to help teach them the behaviors that they're going to need, being in just typical classroom settings. And we think that that's critically important to the advancement of this field and treatment.
Hmm. Right.
For Mia, what behaviors or what therapeutic interventions were most successful, and what kind of therapies did she engage in?
Well, a lot of it. Well, even currently, we have an aide that works with her in terms of the physicality aspects of it. So she could, because she's not going to be inherently, she's not going to choose to like do perhaps aware her body awareness. Like in
Mhm.
other words, I think I'll go to the gym and work out,
Right.
or jog, or ride a bike, or something, or things like that.
Yeah.
But yet she's always game for whatever kind of instruction someone will give her.
Hmm.
So in other words, so I think that's been a big thing, especially now. Like I say, at 36 years old, she's a woman now, and so we would just want her to be, aware of that. She has to take care of her body as much as her mind and anything else,
Mhm.
and so those kinds of things that can't be ignored, because otherwise, if you just focus on the autism aspect of it and what's going on mentally, and then forget about, well, you may find all of a sudden you've got a child sitting there who's maybe weighs 300 pounds
Mhm.
and is sitting in a corner, and you're worrying about, that how the autism affects their mental aspects, but you're not caring about the rest of their physical being.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that whole being aware of that whole total body experience of that, that is incorporate as much, physical therapies as you would
That's interesting.
mental therapies.
Do you think it's that's very interesting. So you have someone kind of nudging her towards doing this or doing that, and then she's
Ye-
on board.
Yeah, exactly. In other words, like, because somebody who was like into that, almost like a fitness instructor. It's like,
Yeah.
so like, hey, let's try yoga. Let's try and what's great is Mia will embrace a lot of these things. Like
Huh.
she'll say, I want to do Pilates, or I want to do yoga. So that once you've created that positive reinforcement of
Yeah.
doing these things, she'll then want to do it for the rest of her life. Because when she grabs something, she usually grabs it 100%.
That's interesting because in a lot of other kind of therapies that I've utilized with my patients over the years, we talk about like social anxiety, right? And oftentimes we have to work them up to exposing themselves to the things that they're fearful of, right?
Right,
Like going to the gym or any of the things
right.
you mentioned. Do you think for her it's some of that, or is it just someone needs to remind her to do these things? Like when she's in it, is she anxious about it, or
Yeah, I think a reminder is a good thing, or having a schedule.
okay,
Just kind
yeah,
of knowing that she's always liked the routine of, That's what I mean. Here we had the one daughter who's not on the spectrum. I wish her room when she was growing up was halfway as organized as Mia's room, because you'd think Mia was in the army.
yeah,
Everything is perfectly lined up. This very regimented
yeah,
about that,
yeah,
and the same thing with the daily routine, what she's going to do. She accepts that and will do it. The social thing, I mean, it's been, and I know that exists with many people on the autism spectrum. Like, in
yeah.
other words, they have these kinds of, those kinds of issues. That's never been the case so much with me. And maybe it's because of like I say, the kind of lifestyle we live. I mean, we're almost like Ricky and Lucy, my wife and I.
Mm.
She's like Lucy to my Ricky, because
Mhm.
she really kind of stirs the drink. She's a driving force.
Yeah.
And so because of it, nobody could exist in our family who was kind of a shrinking violet. It just couldn't. And so, and Mia included. So because of it, she never had that thing of fear of talking to somebody, or, being hesitant,
Okay, so it wasn't a fear and anxiousness.
not at all. In
Got
other
it.
words, if she walked in here right now, she'd walk right up to you and say, "Hi, what's your name? What's your birthday?" And then you tell her your birthday,
And she
and then
never
she'd
forget it.
remember it for the rest of her life. And then a year from now, she'd say, "Well, today's the doctor's birthday." Who? Dr. Ted. What?
So that brings up a couple questions actually. So you mentioned the routine, very common.
Mhm.
And it doesn't surprise me to hear about the condition of her room, military, like, very organized. What would happen, maybe especially more when she was younger, what would happen when that routine was disrupted?
I think if it's explained to her,
Uh-huh.
and she understands that there's a need for that disruption, it's okay.
Uh-huh. Okay.
But otherwise, I think she'll be aware of it. It's interesting. Like we started looking into what sort of occupational things could she perhaps do?
Mhm.
Especially she's an adult. I mean, it'd be
Yeah.
nice if we can get her into some sort of work. My wife ran a restaurant for 16 years, and Mia actually did the bookkeeping on it because she's so good with
Huh.
numbers and facile with the computer.
Mhm.
So she ran, the word processing stuff to do the books,
Yeah.
and was very good at it.
Yeah.
But she's also the type that if we go into a grocery store, if she's walking down the aisle and if she'll notice a couple cans on the shelf are misaligned, she'll stop and straighten them out
Organize them.
because she'll organize them.
Yeah.
But yet, on the other hand, if you ask her, say, would you like to maybe get a job working in a, she loves makeup. She actually, we enrolled her in a makeup school.
Yeah.
Actually, there was this famous school out here called the Mud School. And it was the first time they had somebody with autism actually take the course. And she excelled at it when we had her sister take it with her just so she'd have a companion.
Yeah.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by ABA Centers of America.
So Mia's obsessed with makeup. She loves it. So she knows everything about it. She's made friendships of famous makeup artists because of it, this, that, and the other. But yet when you ask her something like, well, would you like to go to perhaps work at let's say one of these makeup stores that they could probably arrange for it to work.
Mhm.
Working in their back room and, sorting out the makeup. It's like, no, she doesn't really want to do that, but she does want to be out front and doing makeup on the customers and maybe
Gotcha.
selling stuff to the customers. Now, whether I don't know if her language is such that I don't think the sales part that'd be kind of difficult. But actually doing makeup and stuff, and she's actually I've even brought her on a few film sets where she's been able to kind of act as a little bit of an assistant,
Oh, interesting.
especially when I did a series called As We See It, which was dealt with people on the spectrum. So anyway, so it just depends on the situation, but
Yeah, that's very fascinating. So, it was a certain aspect of it she wanted to do. She was much more interested in the sales piece of it, but
yeah, which is kind of contrary to maybe what a lot of people think of people with autism in the sense that that they lack that social kind
yeah,
of thing. But no, she wants to mix it right up with
she
the
wanted the
public.
interaction.
She wants to be upfront doing that.
Is that something that she became better at over time? I mean, I'm assuming it would be. Like, I've worked with kids and I've seen kids who, very young and, you try to take the remote control away from them between the hours of 5 and 10 because of the
Yeah,
routine, like, they'll have a tantrum and
right,
some
right,
kind of
right.
behaviors we worked with. Is that something she progressed with over time? And
Yeah, I think so. In a sense that, because first of all, you talk about like let's say television. She doesn't hardly watch any.
Mhm.
The only thing she kind of likes to watch is Saturday Night Live.
Uh-huh.
Every Saturday night, she'll tape it and watch that. There's no other television program that she's like. She likes to go on the computer, likes to be able to jump around this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
She understands all that. But yeah, and I think high school was a big change and a very positive change
Mm.
because at that age, and like I say, working on the inclusion aspect of it, those 4 years of high school, she would on occasion spend some time in an adaptive class
Right.
within the high school. But for the most part, at this particular high school here in Los Angeles, they had a thing called the theater school within the high school that you had
Mhm.
to like try out for and be part of. And if you did, you spent almost half your day doing that. So everything you were doing was more theater oriented.
Right.
Well, she tried out for it and she got in, and it was the first time that they had somebody
Huh.
on the autism spectrum being part of that. So she was always doing the school plays and getting involved on that level. And because of it, and because she was being with these same kids every day for almost half the day each day, she made some very strong connections with those particular kids, and none of them were on the spectrum. So it was always refreshing to be able to you know, go there on parent night and get to the school or something and see these kids. We walk by going, "Hey Mia, how you doing?" I'll sit there, "Hi Jimmy, hi." And of course these kids would say, "Hey Mia, when's my birthday?" And of course Mia would tell them and they'd look at me, "Hey, Mia's great." And so it was that just, we, my wife and I loved the fact that she had made these connections with these kids who were obviously not on the spectrum and so for that whole high school experience, so much of it was in the non-spectrum world.
How do you think it would have been different for her had she not been diagnosed and not gotten the help that she needed and been treated throughout her life, and she's just in high school? Like, how do you think things would have been different?
Yeah, I dread to think that. And I
Yeah.
mean, and I feel bad if there are places in this planet where, and there probably are, where, in other words, due to whatever it is, lack of education, due to
Mhm.
just, some far-fetched places where it's just not, where
Yeah.
civilization just hasn't really caught up,
Right.
where basically these people are just shunted off as being, well, they're the weird ones, they're
Yeah.
the whatever. But yet there may also be cultures that look at them as like, oh, they're the spiritual ones.
Yeah.
No, they're the enlightened ones, and we kind of, we take care of them. I don't know. I mean, I can only relate to what we've done here, but yes, I would think that would have been much harder and much more difficult.
To our listeners out there and to parents who are watching, I asked that question because unfortunately it is still happening, right? We have brought awareness, light years ahead over the last 30 years, but we still have a long way to go. Some of what what we're talking about here is not just not catching the symptoms or not seeing it early. It's that ego that can kind of get in the way. There's nothing wrong with my kid. You're
Right.
going to just go do it and you're going to handle it and you're going to deal with it yourself. But to those who are listening, who are just getting interested in this subject for whatever reason, maybe it's because your child is displaying some of these symptoms. The best thing you can do for them, and the best thing you can do for yourself, because the family needs support too. It's not just the person that is suffering from the symptoms. The best thing you can do is get a professional diagnosis, get that treatment and that support they need early, and then include them as much as possible in the real world, in the classroom settings, and help them along the way to develop the skills that they're going to need to live an active life. And it sounds like that's exactly what's happened.
Exactly.
Tell us a little bit about the relationship with your other daughter. How did they get along, and how was that early?
Well,
Early on?
well, that daughter was born, as I said, just when Mia was diagnosed, it was literally weeks later that our daughter Gia was born.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, like I said, we were in New York at the time. We were subletting an apartment in New York, and we flew my mother in to kind of watch over Mia when I would be filming, and Arlene my wife was in the hospital giving birth
Yeah.
to the baby. And I remember when we brought the baby home to the apartment, we picked her up at the hospital, and we walked into the apartment. And you gotta remember, Mia was only 2.5 years old at
Yeah.
the time. We're still so sensitive to things like sounds and this and that. All of a sudden, we walked in with the baby, our daughter, baby Gia, and Gia started crying, wailing, like as a baby will, like, meh. And Mia, of course, this was a total, what's going on here? What's
Yeah.
going on? She starts screaming and holding her ears.
Yeah.
And my wife looks at me and goes, oh my God, what are we going to do? And I remember saying, she'll laugh and she'll bring this up to me. She says, she remembers me looking at her saying, well, she's going to have to get used to it because Mia's staying, and so is Gia. And it was like, oh, of course, yes. I mean, because our impulse always was in other situations, well, we'll just have to leave the room or
Yeah.
take Mia elsewhere. It was like, no, this is the new normal now,
Yeah.
and so that's where it began. And so, and then one thing that we came to realize, and it was a real blessing, of course, then to have another child. Not because we're saying, oh God, you must have another child if you have a child on the spectrum. I mean, that's just the way it worked out. Gia was born, we have another daughter. But one thing, first of all, as Gia matured and went through the stages of her life, it was interesting for us because we would say, we more than a few times, we would have the occasion to say, oh, wait a minute, Gia is exhibiting a certain kind of thing that Mia used to do at that age. So I guess it wasn't that autism. It was just because this is the way a 5-year-old acts, or a 7-year-old acts, or a 3-year-old acts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there's that. And so that was, in a way, enlightening. And the other thing was, and it exists to this day, I mean, Gia is totally committed and understands she's the younger sister, but yet she's the big sister because it
Yeah.
has to be. But yet the other thing is, they're sisters. And so she tolerates a lot less from her sister than perhaps we did,
Yeah.
because we had to deal with it right from birth. And before Gia even existed, we
Right.
had this child that we knew had special needs and might need special care. But on the other hand, Gia is more like, hey, no, wait a minute. She's my sister. She may be a little older than me. She may have autism, but then we draw the line.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so they'll relate on a level that I can't even pretend to
That's
get
interesting.
involved in, and shouldn't. But it's all good, because at the end of the day, they count on each other, they love each other, and that's what's important.
Yeah, agreed.
So that I think that's hopefully the lesson learned, is that when you're a family, everybody's got to be involved. Everybody's got to be part of the mix.
One thing, kind of thinking back to something you said earlier on in this interview, is that you had this moment completely out of the blue where you almost had to decide, I'm going to face this and advocate, or
Right.
I'm going to try to deny it or hide it.
Right.
And you chose to advocate, and you've been doing it for quite some time. What, as a public figure, what are some of the things that you see? What kind of misconceptions do you encounter most often around autism?
Well, I'm happy to say I don't encounter as much as I used to.
Yeah. Maybe go back in time a little
Because
bit.
I think go back in time
Yeah.
is that thing. I mean, a lot of people you can sense it that the general populace was a little less tolerant of what was going on because they weren't being educated. They weren't even aware.
Mhm.
The word autism was like it was a scary kind of a thing. And all of a sudden, if they hear that, well, this person has autism, I mean, there were people be nervous about it. Like, is that bad? Is that dangerous? Does that mean that this kid might do something and hurt my kid or something? You know
Mhm.
what I mean? In other words, there was a lot of misconceptions about
Fear.
even what fear.
Yeah.
And I get it. Fear comes from lack of knowledge,
Exactly.
not understanding. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? So I would just say this: that over these 30 plus years that that me has been our daughter, I've seen that education change. I mean, the sad side of it is part of the reason that's changed is because the prevalence of autism seems to be much more than it was.
Yeah.
I mean, when Mia was born, they were saying something like 1 out of every 1,500 births
Right.
might be on the spectrum. I mean, that number just skyrocketed to a whole different kind of. I don't even know what it is now, but certainly,
I still see different ranges.
yeah.
Some as high as 1 in 36.
That's what I mean. So if you
Yeah.
go from 1 in 1,500 to 1 in 36, that's something. And if nothing else, it's caught the attention of it had to. It caught the attention of the world.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can't deny it anymore. You can't say, well, that happens to other people.
Not us, right?
It's like anything else. You can almost talk to any individual and they will, at least if they don't have a member in their family on the spectrum, they know somebody
Yeah.
or whatever, have had contact with them. And that's and so it's I'm not so much aware of what the in other words, those negative aspects of it. They're
Mhm.
always going to be, maybe we're just inured to it too because we know what to expect. And but I think there is a general awareness of it, which is good.
Agreed. And the more and more aware we become, the better the outcomes. And back to the ratio of diagnoses, it's not entirely clear whether or not autism is surging.
Right.
Whether it may be that we're just getting much, much better at recognizing it.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think there's probably a mix
I
of the
think
two,
so
right?
too. I mean, because I think, like I said, I think what a lot of people could classify it as quirkiness,
Yeah.
or they were, they're a little bit off, or whatever you wanted to call it, has been, with all the research we've done, and said, okay, that's just falling into. That's why, as you said earlier, it's a very wide spectrum, and it encompasses a whole lot of people.
That's right. Other thoughts I had, and this is for these days, we're also busy, right? These
Right.
days, it's more the norm for both parents in a household to be working, and you've arguably been one of the busiest actors in Hollywood for quite a while. So how did you balance all that? I mean, you mentioned you traveled together, but how did you balance your incredibly busy acting career with now this challenge of raising a daughter who
Yeah.
needs extra attention?
Well, again, I think it helped that we made that decision that it was going to be all inclusive.
Yeah.
So, in other words, um, if I had made the choice of like, okay, we're going to make things a little separate, like dad's going to have this thing he has to do, and then you guys do that, and then when we're together, we're together. I think that's, in a way, to me, that's more difficult.
Yeah.
That then you're really compounding an issue
Mhm.
here, and I think what's worked for us is that I live by a motto that is everyone has a story and nobody gets a free ride.
Mm.
Now that's my story is our story. And no, we didn't get a free ride,
Mhm.
but nobody's got a free ride. And so, and I think it's one of those things that if you looked at everybody else individually and say to them, oh, you know what? I wish I had their life. You better be careful before you say that until you maybe scratch the surface.
Yeah, or look under the hood.
Yeah, look under the hood because I don't care who they are. You can say, oh man, wow, look at that person. What a great life they've got. I'd trade places with them in a heartbeat. Yeah, maybe not. So in other words, these are the cards I've been dealt in life.
Yeah.
I'm happy to play them. I feel very blessed to have had the cards I've dealt in my
Mhm.
life. I don't, not for an instant do I forget. Look, it's the reason you're having me on this show. If I was
Yeah.
Joe Blow from Kokomo, I wouldn't be here right now. But the reason I am is because of I get it because of what I do for a living,
Mhm.
and I know that there are millions and millions of people on this planet if been given the choice and hey, would you like to have Joe Mantegna's occupation? Yeah, I get it. They'd raise their hand. I would too. If I was stamping fenders at a Ford plant, which you're not even doing right now because you're on strike, unfortunately. So I mean, I never lose sight of that. That no matter how you make the most of your life as to what it is. I feel very blessed to have had the life I've had. Yeah, look, somebody said to me, you see these interviews and people say, I wouldn't change a thing. My daughter or my son has autism, but I wouldn't have changed a thing. No, I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah.
If I could change it, would she have autism? No, absolutely not. I'd want her to have had experienced life just as, I've had, my wife's had, my other daughters had. And that sometimes there's going to be painful aspects of it, this, that, and the other. But at least that, you know what I mean? That's probably what nature more intended, that this is a little bit of, offshoot. But that's okay. Because yet on the other hand, and my wife has this theory, and I think there might be something to it. She thinks because of those aspects that like Mia has and other people on the spectrum have that are almost savant-like,
Yeah.
that we think maybe in some ways these people are also they're falling into that evolutionary crack, that there's somewhere lost between where we're going next. That in other words, they're kind of restricted, and I don't want to misuse the word handicap, but I mean, but they're kind of have these other issues that we're not used to, and in a way hold them back in our current society. But yet they have these other abilities that they're tapping onto that we don't even tap onto. They're getting parts of their brain and accessing things that we haven't even tapped into. So that maybe as evolution goes over the next thousands and thousands of years, there's going to be, just like we said earlier, that there are these couple people who are like the geniuses, the Einsteins,
Yeah.
who, dressed like he was had autism, probably. But yet maybe there's an evolutionary aspect to it that they're moving towards something. So who's to say? But in the meantime, all you can do is, as I said, getting back to your question, we didn't make many allowances for that her particular diagnosis. It's like, okay, that's the deal, but our life goes on. We're going to live our life. We have to make adjustments as we need to, but beyond that, this is it. So how are we going to play it?
This podcast is proudly sponsored by ABA Centers of America.
I can relate to a few things you just mentioned. As a therapist and a psychologist, I chose from a very, very early on to willingly enter into the life of other people's pain. And I can tell you from experience, from exactly what you just said, you have no idea what's going on in people's lives. Like, oh, I would love to take that person's life in a heartbeat. You just don't know. You have no idea what they're struggling with, which is why we should all probably try to be a little more kind to each other. Right?
Exactly right.
And there's another thing you mentioned too is there's absolutely no doubt like the savant side of it is always actually kind of what most interested me. I mean, you see the exceptional stories. There's a young man, I don't remember his name, but he took a helicopter ride over Manhattan. You know
I
what
know
I'm
the
talking
one,
about?
the artist.
Yes.
See, my daughter has that, some not like that, but she
Uh-huh.
has great artistic capabilities. In fact, Maria Shriver had a show at Sacramento, at the state capitol here, and one of Mia's paintings was in that.
Really?
Because she's at an art class right now,
Uh-huh.
and she has this incredible talent as an artist, and has had shows and for charity where they've sold some of her paintings and stuff like that. She does have this. It's unique, but it's really skilled. You know what I mean? But I know that when the kid with the helicopter was able to just duplicate what
Mind-blowing,
he saw,
wasn't
yeah, unbelievable.
The detail.
That's the extreme of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Mia has a taste of that.
Yeah.
And that's, yes, exactly what we were talking
So it's an interesting theory that you kind of just mentioned is almost, that piece of it, being able to tap into the processing power of the human brain that other people don't. It's interesting in some form or fashion. Is that an evolutionary jump that we're
Right.
marching towards?
Right.
I hadn't thought of that before. That's interesting.
Right.
You've been an advocate in this space. Is there anything you want to talk about with the advocacy work that you do and what you're working on now and how you're continuing to advance the awareness?
Well, I mean, I just, like I say, I just by having a public face, doing things like this,
Yeah.
if it's helpful, I'm happy. That's why I'm happy to do it.
It is.
Because I just figure, if one person out there benefits from the fact I just did this
Exactly.
thing with you today, then it was worth it.
Exactly.
So that's all. It's just that. It's just again, it's the more exposure, the more information, the more education that's out there, the better. And just what we just say about early inclusion and getting on it and understanding what's going on and doing what you can do to, because there are things you can do to, certainly make it better.
I spent my whole career around that one motto, really. If I make a difference or, save a life even once, and if I do this for 35 years before I retire, all my education in the career was absolutely worth it.
Or exactly.
I keep thinking back with this work, I keep thinking back to that moment when parents find out there's something wrong here and the getting the diagnosis. At first, for a lot of parents I've talked to, it's very shocking and fearful, but then almost somewhat relieving that they know that there's a syndrome here
Hmm.
and that there's something we can do about
Right.
it. So, what advice, if you had to kind of sum it up, what advice would you give to the parent or parents who have that 2.5-year-old who
Right.
just found out? Like, what would you suggest they
Well, I
do?
would just say, don't be, be aware that it's normal to get that reaction. In other words, if there's going to be that shock. There's going to be, as I mentioned earlier, that moment of when your heart goes in your stomach and go,
Mhm.
oh my God. But then, just like you said, there's the relief of at least understanding, well, okay, at least we have a name for this. We know what kind of where this kind of falls in. Maybe not specifically, but at least we know that this is not something that just, this is the only kid in the world this has happened to, and we have no
Exactly.
idea what this is. So, and then I think beyond that, it's just understanding like, okay, we have that information. Now, what are we going to do about it? What resources are open to us? What's available for us? You got to understand, when my daughter was born, there was no internet.
Yeah.
I mean, that stuff didn't even exist. So, I
Like,
mean,
my kids don't understand that, by the way.
yeah, exactly. I mean, you'd have to go to the Encyclopedia Britannica to look it up,
Yeah, my kids really didn't get that
Wouldn't
one.
even know what that is. I always felt that has to be I'd like to see the people who retired from that job having to sell, books door to
Door to
door.
door, yeah.
But, so there's a lot of resources out there. So it's just understanding that, okay, you've now been anointed with this lifelong task of doing what you can do to see what you can do to make this work for you and your family. And
Yes.
that's okay. Because like, as I said, again, going back to that thing, nobody gets a free ride. This is the ride you're on. Embrace it, because boy, it could be, it's like that proverb, I felt bad when I'm paraphrasing it. I felt bad when I lost my shoes till I met the man with no feet. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? That kind of thing. So, it's that. So expect the shock and there's going to be anger, shock, whatever, all those emotions that you go through, but you get over that fairly quickly and realize, oh, now what are we going to do?
Yeah. Kinda what you're talking about, this is kinda like the stages of grief,
Yeah, exactly
almost.
right.
It's totally normal to experience those
Right.
emotions. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your family foundation and what you guys do?
Well, just actually, this is fairly recent. I started Mantegna Family Foundation, partly because, as you can imagine, I did. When for me, it was first diagnosed, we got involved. There was a group called out of New York, NAR, National Alliance for Autistic Research. They were based on the East Coast. I was doing some things for them, you know, helping them out,
Yeah.
some appearances, whatever, promoting what they were doing. Then we moved back out here to California. There was a group called CAN, Cure Autism Now.
Mhm.
They were involved, doing something, got involved with them. Then Bob Wright, who was then chairman of NBC, who, being in the show business, I knew who he was, and him and his wife, they had a grandson on the spectrum. They got involved, and they
Hmm.
were instrumental in bringing those two groups together, which
Interesting.
created Autism Speaks,
Ah, yes.
which became this huge major kind of thing. So all I'm saying, at every stage of as Mia grew up and we got involved in the autism community, we were involved. Oh, this group. Oh, well, that group. Oh no, those two groups have come together. So now, ever since then, we've been kind of partly focusing more on smaller local kinds of things,
Hmm.
partly because the early intervention stuff and the stuff looking for cures and all that has to be there. I
Yeah.
understand that, we get that. But yet, when your daughter is, you have a child that's is an adult and is going to be adult maybe for another 30, 40, maybe
Yeah.
50 years, you start looking in that direction too. What are the places and organizations and things they're going to deal with? Things like employment, housing, ongoing care, whether it's medical,
Mhm.
and all those things. So we would get involved with all these different groups. A lot of them were local. There was a group after COVID happened. There was a group here in Los Angeles. It was a Jewish-based group called EDA. And what they started to do was through the regional center. And of course, regional center becomes important to anybody with children with autism, where they have regional centers, I guess, all across the country.
Mhm.
But this particular organization, besides when the COVID happened, they couldn't have the in-house kind of thing. They were doing a thing where they had an online thing from 10
Mhm.
in the morning to 2 in the afternoon.
Was that effective?
Very effective.
Interesting.
Because normally with our daughter, we'd have her go out with her aide to like taking art classes,
Yeah.
going here and there, going to museums, all of a sudden that couldn't happen.
Yeah, it'll get
So
shut
now you've
down.
got a child who's sitting in a room at home, can't leave the house, and all those experiences that she's used to doing don't exist. Now at least there's this 10 o'clock in the morning, she goes on with it. There's all these other kids on there as well, and the young adults and all that, and somebody moderating. And they would do different things. Some of it was, they have to accommodate people who are lower on the spectrum, some higher on the spectrum,
Mhm.
and this, that, and the other. So it's never going to be perfect for every one individual,
Right.
but it was beneficial and it was great, and I was happy to see it. So it made us realize organizations like that and all different kinds that do different things. They're always, some of them don't fall into the, under the auspices of like where they're getting, government funding or this, that, and the
Mhm.
other. So very often I would be asked to do things like this,
Yeah.
where they'll say, "Hey, we'll give you an honorarium to do something, this, that, or the other." And what I'll do is I'll say, "Great, and let's direct it toward my foundation, not mine, but my family, the Mantegna Family Foundation." And at the end, being in my line of work, I get those opportunities. Why not then do those things and then use those funds to help these organizations that are always can use the help? I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It's like, it's why they say I'll do these charity golf tournaments often. I'm a terrible golfer, but I'll do them just for that. And they'll say, "Well, so what brings you here? Why, And I'll say, "Well, why wouldn't I be here?" I says, "I'm a bad golfer, but I get to play golf on a Monday, have a nice day, and this charity is going to benefit from
Yeah.
it. Why wouldn't I do that?" I mean, it's like I feel blessed to have that opportunity.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with the foundation. If we're able to generate funding for people that can use it who are doing positive work, why wouldn't I?
Absolutely. I want to thank Joe Mantegna so much for being here today, for speaking about autism awareness. It was just an unbelievable opportunity to meet you in person. I've been a huge fan for many, many years. My kids love you on The Simpsons, and my daughter still doesn't believe that I'm meeting you today. So this is going to be fun to show her. So thank you very much for coming on.
My pleasure.
To learn more about the spectrum and our podcasts, visit abacenters.com. Like and subscribe to our channel to stay educated. We have many more fantastic guests and episodes coming, so I hope you'll tune in again to watch us next time. In the meantime, I'm Dr. Bender. Thank you for joining us.